especially in the short term. I'll talk briefly at the end about how these projections have changed from our previous edition and some of the reasons behind that. Next slide, please, Darren. If one of the key takeaways is that top-line finding of modest growth followed by decline, another key theme is that the population of high school graduates will continue to get more and more diverse in coming years. One important distinction in the data as I talk about race ethnicity is that these numbers are only for public school students only. We don't have good race ethnicity data on private school students. But the chart does a nice job of summing up the story. What you see here is the blue bar representing white non-Hispanic students is steadily shrinking over time. White non-Hispanic students make up just over half of the graduating class in 2019, but are projected to decline as a proportion of the total to 43% by 2036. While you see the number of white graduates is projected to decline, you see that the proportion of Hispanic graduates, represented by the dark green bar, is expected to grow slightly from 25% to 28% over the course of the projections. You can also see that the Asian Pacific Islander students are expected to increase slightly, as are multiracial graduates. I do also want to note the American Indian Alaska Native category. It's essentially that very small wedge that you can see over towards the right of the bars. We expect the total number of these graduates to decline, both in total and as a proportion of the total graduating classes, but there's more nuance to this category than some of the others. A significant number of American Indian Alaska Native students also identify as another race or as Hispanic, more so than other racial ethnic categories. Separate from this work, we've looked at US Census data and found that in higher education, only around 34% of students who identify in any way as American Indian Alaska Native fit into the category and are counted in federal data. The other individuals also either identify as Hispanic, in which case they are categorized as Hispanic under the federal definitions, or identify as another race, in which case they fall into the 2 or more race category. So certainly caution is warranted here before interpreting the data showing stark declines in the number of American Indian Alaska Native graduates. And for those interested, we also expect that in 2021 or 2022, it would be the first year in which in which non-white students make up the majority of public high school graduates. Next slide, please. So we have a couple of different ways of looking at this. This chart shows the change in the number of graduates compared to 2019 by race ethnicity. The blue line shows the significant decline compared to 2019 in the number of white non-Hispanic graduates. Meanwhile, the green line representing Hispanic graduates shows strong growth through 2026, then starts to level off and decline somewhat. But at the end of the projections, there are still projected to be more Hispanic graduates than there are in 2019. Meanwhile, the total number of African American graduates is expected to decline slightly, while the number of Asian Pacific Islander students is expected to grow. Next slide, please. And this slide shows the same chart, but for multiracial students, American Indian, Alaska Native students, Asian students, and Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders disaggregated from the Asian category. You can see strong growth here in the number of 2 or more race graduates and substantial growth in the number of Asian graduates, where we are able to at least disaggregate it through 2030. You can also see here the slight decline in the projected number of American Indian Alaska Native graduates, but as I noted before, there's caution warranted before drawing firm conclusions there. Next slide, please. The last trend that I'll talk about relates to students in private high schools. The last several years have produced strong growth in the number of graduates from this sector. The last year of reported data here, though, is for 2017 because we rely on a federal survey for this information. The gray line here represents private students, and you can see the current data suggests strong growth for the sector through the middle of the decade before declining to just over 4% above the 2017 numbers. And this is one area where data can be a bit volatile and dependent on economic factors. Previously, our last edition, we saw and projected big declines in this sector, and that was mainly driven by data coming out of the Great Recession when, likely due to economic factors, not most, but a lot of families had to move out of private education and into public education. And this is an area where we do expect some significant COVID-19 related impacts. I'm sure you've all seen anecdotal stories of some parents looking for private options that stayed in person. Also similar anecdotes about people leaving private schools because of the economic implications of the pandemic. So that's certainly an area we'll wait to see what the next releases of data say. The public graduates in blue and the total overall in black mostly move in tandem, reflecting the dominance of the public sector. And you see both of those ending up down about 4 to 5% by the end of the projections. Next slide, please, Darren. And so to begin to wrap up, I want to talk quickly about some of the differences between these projections and our last edition that was published in 2016. To simplify what those differences are, we see the actual numbers and the projections systematically larger in the number of students in the graduating classes, both in actual data and the projections going forward compared to our last edition. This is generally true across almost all states. It's true across all regions, and as Sheridan will show in talking about New England, it has changed the outlook slightly. This is mostly due to increases in public schools among students of color graduating, and that's attributable to improvements in graduation rates. So essentially, more students are making it through the pipeline than before, which is good news. This good news, unfortunately, doesn't change the overall shape of the long-term projections curve. We're still going to hit a national peak in the middle of the decade before declining, but that peak has gotten higher and the decline is moderated somewhat as the education system has made some improvements in high school graduation. And as I said, Sheridan will talk more about what that looks like specifically for the New England region. Darren, next slide, please. And a quick COVID-19 discussion. As we think about some of the initial impacts of the pandemic on the graduating class of 2020, which seems like a lifetime ago. But if you think back to spring, when there were significant policy changes granting flexibility to students, and unprecedented disruptions, nobody knew exactly what was going to happen. We don't know how the changes will play out in the data, but there has been some preliminary research in a very small number of states suggesting that we may actually see more graduates than expected in 2020. But helpfully, there has also been some preliminary research pointing in the opposite direction. So at this point, we just don't know what that's looking like. We think, however, that the current graduating class, the class of 2021, and subsequent classes are likely to be more affected than the class of 2020. As I said, we won't have the data to look at this for some time, but we'll be looking at some leading indicators and try to get a sense of where the numbers may go, and then look to adjust our tools to help all the stakeholders in the education community as best we can. So stay tuned there. And Darren, next slide, please. And this is really the last part for me, but for those of you that are really interested in this topic, I'm here obviously to talk about WICHE's data and our website, but I also want to make sure that you're aware of Nathan Grawe's latest book. He put out a book probably 4 or 5 years ago that was similar and does a projection more focused on the demand for higher education, whereas our numbers are more of a supply side estimation. The book is, I believe, just out, within the last week or so. There's just a write-up in Inside Higher Ed, and it's got updated data, and it's really a terrific piece of work. So I would encourage you to look that up if you haven't already. And with that, Sheridan, I will go ahead and pass it over to you.
Thanks so much, Pat. And I just want to give a big thank you to you and all of your colleagues at WICHE for giving us a reason to be here in the first place. So let me take a second and share my screen. Okay, here. Okay. So as you all heard, Pat gave us some great data about the national implications of the Knocking at the College Door report. And as he pointed out, we're going to see a national decline in the number of high school graduates over the next 16 or so years. And in New England, we are also going to see that decline. In fact, in our region, we're set to witness a 12.7% decline over the next 16 years in the number of high school graduates, so from now until 2037. In the next 10 minutes, I'll be doing my best to run through the general declines, the sector declines, and the demographic changes that we are set to witness here in New England. So starting off with just a general overview and some general data. This graph here represents the percent change in the number of high school graduates between 2019 and every corresponding year until 2037. So over here in this chart, I've highlighted the years 2020, 2025, 2030, and 2037, just to give a little bit more clarity about how the numbers are going to change. So if we start at the beginning, if we look at the change in high school graduation between 2019 and 2020, we can see between those 2 years, New Hampshire had a 2% increase in the number of high school graduates. Maine and Rhode Island stayed at 0%, there was no change. Massachusetts and Vermont saw a 1% decrease, and Connecticut saw a 2% decrease. And as you can see from this graph as well, there are certain trends that track across all of our states when we're looking at the number of graduating high school students over the next 16 years. I think to point out most prominently, with the exception of New Hampshire and Rhode Island, all 4 of the other New England states are going to see an increase in the number of high school graduates before they see a decline. And I'll just direct your attention really quickly to these 2 dashed lines right here, which represent a bit of a graduation cliff. So specifically if we look at 2025, we can see here that Massachusetts, Maine, and Vermont are going to see a larger high school graduating class before a decline. And then in 2032, there's going to be another small peak specifically in Vermont and Maine. And then to sum up this data, by 2037, we are going to see a 9% decline in the number of graduating high school students in Maine, 10% in Massachusetts, 16% decline in Vermont from 2019 to 2037. And in New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, we're going to see an 18% decline, which is obviously very significant. So if we look at just the raw data and the numbers here on this slide, I've included just the number of high school students that we are projected to lose over the next 16 years. And we can look down here and see New England. And again, we're projected to see in the region as a whole a 12.7% decrease in the number of graduating high school students, from 170,000 students to 148,490, which is a total projected loss of 25,510 students. And over on the side here, I've also just laid out the number of students that we are projected to lose state by state in the next 16 years. And to give a little bit of context, because I know there are a lot of numbers on this slide right now, I just wanted to point out the enrollment of the largest high schools state by state to give a little bit of conceptual information. So for example, in Connecticut, the largest high school enrolls in all 4 grades about 3,086 students. And if these projected losses are accurate, then by 2037, we'll basically be losing 2 Danbury high schools, so 2 of the largest high schools in Connecticut in terms of graduating classes. So just to give you a little bit of context and for you to visualize that a little bit better about what that decline really means and looks like in the region. So now I'll just talk very briefly about the sector information between our public and private high schools in New England. So if we disaggregate this data by sector, we can see an 11% decline in the number of public high school graduates between 2020 specifically here and 2037. And that, so for our public schools, we graduated 145,000 students in 2020, and we're set to graduate 129,170 by the year 2037. And again, that's an 11% decline. In terms of our private schools, this decline is going to be more significant. We're going to be looking at a 23% decline over the next 16 years, from 25,000 private school graduates to 19,320 by the year 2037. And as we all know, coming from New England, we are a small but mighty region. We make up only 4.5% of the nation's total high school graduates. But an interesting fact is that we actually make up 7% of all private school graduates in the United States. So this decline is significant when we look at the data like that. So this data is just regional. If you're interested in looking at the sector disaggregation state by state, you can find that in WICHE's Knocking at the College Door report. They have some really great interactive dashboards that you can check out. And I just want to remind everyone that we will be sending on Monday or Tuesday of next week, we will be sending all the slides presented today, as well as this recorded webinar, and a copy of the Knocking at the College Door report and our New England analysis. So I think one of the most interesting things that came out of this report is the demographic shifts that we are set to see over the next 16 or so years. So as Pat explained, nationally, we are going to see a large decline in the number of white high school graduates in the nation. But as we all know, coming from New England, this region is a predominantly white one, but we are diversifying, and we're diversifying quickly. And that might be why we are set to see such a more significant decline in the number of white high school graduates. So nationally, we're going to see a projected decline of 19% of our white high school graduates by 2037. In New England, that decline is set to be around 29%. So there's a 10% difference there. So again, quite significant. And if we look at the other demographic information coming out of this report in our region specifically, as I said, we're going to see more diverse graduating classes as we go forward. So for example, our Hispanic or Latinx population here in New England, we are going to see a 54% increase in the number of Latinx high school graduates by 2036. Followed behind this graduating demographic, we are going to see a 42% increase in the graduation of students who identify as multiracial or from 2 or more races or ethnicities. Following that, we are going to see a 7% increase in the numbers of our Black graduating high school students. So that is something to keep in mind. And then if we go further and we look at this data state by state, we can see that each state kind of follows those regional trends that we just looked at in the previous slide. I think the one exception that I want to point you to is where in the rest of these states, the number of Black high school graduates is set to increase. In Connecticut, that number is actually set to decline by 9.5% by 2036. So that's the main difference here. Otherwise, as you can see, across all 6 of our states, the number of white high school graduates is set to decline, where the number of multiracial high school graduates is set to increase, as well as the number of Black and Latinx or Hispanic students. And another thing that I just want to point out really quickly in this data is, as I said before, we are a predominantly white region here in New England, especially in some of our northern states. So in Vermont, for example, I didn't even include the percent change in the amount of Black graduating high school Black graduating high school students by 2036, because it was over a 200% increase and it didn't even fit on this chart. So I just wanted to point that out. And that is because, and the same kind of data is represented in Maine, where you can see an 107% increase in the number of Black graduating high school students and an 128% increase in the number of Hispanic or Latinx graduating high school students. And a lot of that kind of difference is because there is such a small Black, Latinx, and multiracial or multi-ethnic population to begin with, especially in our northern states, that if you add in even a few graduating high school students, that kind of skews that data. So I just wanted to point that out. And so I think when I look at this data, and when we all look at this data about the diversity in our graduating classes going forward over the next 16 years, I think that it is really important as educators, as principals, as anyone who works in student support or in increasing equity in our region specifically, it's important to remember the history of our education systems and how they have been in the past and up until this point largely set up to cater to white students. And so as we see the diversification of our graduating high school classes going forward, it's important to keep that in mind and make sure that we are supporting our non-white students to the best of our ability. And I will go to the next slide. I just threw a lot of information at you in 10 or so minutes. But as I said, if you want to read more or look at more of your state-specific data, we'll be sending around a copy of all of these slides included in today's webinar, as well as WICHE's report, our New England analysis, and this recorded webinar on Monday or Tuesday of next week once we get it up on NEBI's website. And it is my great honor and privilege now to pass the torch along to our panel of esteemed experts who have joined us today. And I will pass it along first to Paul Revell, who Michael introduced at the outset, but Paul is the former Massachusetts Secretary of Education and a current professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So Paul, let me stop sharing my screen here, and the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sheridan. I appreciate that. You've just experienced a blizzard of very concrete statistics on the future of education in our region and in the nation. I've been asked to start at the more 30,000 foot level and provide kind of an overview and some perspective, and largely coming from the K through 12 sphere. And so that's where I want to begin. I have some slides now. I think I'm going to share them, or do you have them up, folks?
If you could share them, that would be great.
Okay, I can share them. I'm going to give you a look at a presentation, or the way I begin a number of presentations that I do these days with colleagues in the K through 12 sphere, because a part of what I'm going to say is the trends that we're analyzing and talking about here are trends that we've been seeing for some while in K through 12 education, and trying to adjust and cope, not very successfully for the most part, with those trends. And I think it's high time we take more dramatic action. And in the midst of this COVID crisis that we've just had, I try to start by beginning to say this is a moment of opportunity for change, for transformation, for seizing the opportunity and the fact that change has become a necessity now as opposed to a choice, and many people choose not to make the choice of change, to do things differently in our respective sectors than we've done them before. We're in the midst of an earthquake, what amounts to a sort of traumatic event in our field. And for the most part, even though we're almost on a year in this unprecedented situation we find ourselves in, we're still coming out from under the rubble and trying to establish sort of basic systems of operation. I think this is no less true in higher education than it is in K-12. When will we reopen? When will we be fully in person? When will it be safe? Who is it safe for? What's our risk tolerance? All these kinds of questions, establishing some basic sense of normalcy without making a commitment to returning to the status quo ante, which in itself was never adequate and wasn't fully doing the job. In some respects, for our society as a whole, this has been a great reveal. It's as though a tidal wave followed the earthquake, lifted the ocean up off the ocean floor, revealing deep lived experience inequities of the lives of so many of the young people we serve. The inability to get adequate nutrition, safe, stable housing, health and mental health care, internet access, to just name a few. Suddenly there's a sense of urgency in society about addressing some of these inequities that have a profound effect on whether or not children are able to show up at school, let alone show up in higher education, and whether they're going to be ready to learn and take full advantage of the opportunity. So what we have is, this Chinese character for crisis, which is composed of two elements, both danger and opportunity. We have enormous danger in our sector, but we have the opportunity to make some transformative change. And what I've said is, I hope this is a Sputnik moment. I mean, most of you are probably not old enough to remember when the Sputnik went up and it really changed our federal government's outlook on involvement in the K-12 sector, because we felt threatened as a nation. And we felt that it was imperative for us to move forward and do better. Otherwise, we were at risk from the Soviet Union and other competitors. So we made some major transformative changes. And it's my hope, I won't read this quote in the interest of time, but I think it's a particularly eloquent rendering of the kind of opportunity that the pandemic presents for us to move away from what we've historically been doing and move into a different domain. So I hope that we'll keep that spirit in mind as we think about the challenge that's just been presented to us. In K-12 education, as I say, we've seen many of these trends for a long time, particularly here in Massachusetts and New England. Our enrollment has been level or declining for some period of time. We've had largely stagnant results, even though some of us in New England are quite proud of our comparative performance relative to other states around the country. At the same time, when you look at the first place finishes, for example, that we've had in Massachusetts, they're all based on averages, and beneath those averages are deep, persistent achievement gaps that line up along the lines of the breakouts of population that we saw earlier. We have some of the largest achievement gaps in the nation. And so, as I used to say when I was secretary, we ought to have a very short celebration of our first place finishes and be more attentive to why we're doing so poorly with some of the populations that were mentioned in the earlier presentations. We've had, for a couple of years now, a majority of students who are low income in US public education writ large in the K-12 sector. We have had now a majority of students who are quote unquote minorities, ethnic or racial minorities. So these are two groups with which in our sector, we've historically not done that well. Suddenly they're the majority, and the challenge to us is figuring out how we do better by these students in the future. We're still seeing an iron law correlation in K-12 between socioeconomic status and educational achievement and attainment. And unfortunately, we're also seeing people shy away from higher education options, particularly young males, because of cost factors associated with it. And that's been going on for some time. But this correlation between socioeconomic status and educational achievement and attainment is something that's worrisome. It's not what America is supposed to be about. It's not the myth of a meritocracy we have. And it's one of the things that I hope we can do something about in the midst of this crisis. COVID has brought to us specifically and immediately a reduction in enrollment. We're already down by 2% within the year. People are falling off the grid altogether. They're out of touch, or they've dropped out. Their parents have pulled them back. They're not entering them in kindergarten. They're creating, pandemic pods. They're sending them to private schooling, or they're doing homeschooling. So that may well affect these numbers in the long term in terms of what we're seeing. So that's an issue. Another big issue is learning loss. Some kids, and it correlates with socioeconomic status, are doing pretty well, thank you very much, keeping pace because they've got a lot of supports and services that they're getting outside of education, outside of the formal institutions, which they're less connected to. And other children are off the grid altogether. They're not able to get the services and supports in their home situation for a variety of reasons. They're falling way behind. So the gaps individually in performance are huge and growing larger, and we got to do something about that. We're seeing more competition for our graduates as they graduate. Certificate programs coming along and competing with their intentions with respect to going to higher education, because they can get the certificate quicker and cheaper with less bureaucracy. We're seeing increased financial pressure, obviously, as young folks consider college and they think about whether or not they can afford it. They're looking at the predicament of their families. They're looking at the pressure that's on institutions to which they might be applying that have less in the way of financial aid. This is going to affect enrollment. Overall, the reveal of inequity that I described with that tidal wave before is very vivid, particularly in this pathway as people move from high school to college. And we see the pressure most on our most vulnerable, most disadvantaged students, just as we see the pressure in higher education on our most vulnerable, least advantaged institutions of higher learning. So I close out by way of talking about the challenges for the future. I think in the sector of higher education, this is hardly a new thought, but it's something with a new administration in Washington that I'm hopeful of, that we can approach the development of a new financial model for higher education in this country. I'm worried that COVID is going to be the straw that breaks the back of the conventional model of higher education that we've all been part of all these years. So we need new federal policy and investment. We need, for example, stronger student support services wrapping around our low-income youngsters, wrapping around our first-time college students. When we look at how our students succeed, not just in getting into college, but persisting, it has every bit to do with the kind of support that they receive within their institutions and the degree to which those institutions are able to take into account the circumstances of their lives outside of school. We need to develop in higher education, because of the statistics that were just presented, the kind of cultural competency that will enable us to deal more effectively with students who come from different backgrounds than the prevailing norms in many of our institutions. And we need to do that quickly. We need to particularly address the needs of economically marginal students. Time and again, when I was Secretary of Education, and I'd ask students at these institutions in our state why other students were dropping out, it had much less to do with academics than it had to do with their financial circumstances. And we've got to make that a priority. And then finally, I'd say, the old model of higher education, where we're relying as heavily as we have been in the past on high school graduates to determine our future in higher education, is just wearing out. And as one president of a prestigious institution who I talked with recently said to me, if you're not thinking beyond that model, if you're not thinking how to serve the market after market of older students and businesses who have needs out there, opening up new territory rather than just wringing our hands about something which we can't really correct for, is the decline in the number of high school graduates, then we're in trouble. Everybody's got to be thinking about those new frontiers. So anyway, that's my perspective from the K-12 sector, my sense of what the aspirational opportunities are, and a few thoughts about recommendations going forward. So it's my job, I think, to turn it over to Professor Tibaldi.
Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate your remarks. In fact, the title of my presentation here is aligned with what you're saying. I mean, we know that the changes that we see in front of our eyes are very hard for the economy, very hard for institutions of higher education. But at the same time, they also offer, I think, opportunities for all of us. Those again who are working in higher education, as well as to business organizations and to government. So I think the takeaway from some of your key points is that we should not lose sight that we do have opportunities to help individuals to catch up, close the educational gap, and that will help to increase the population going to colleges as well as help the economy. So my job is to take the numbers and talk a little bit about the economic implication of that. And I will really build on what Paul was talking about. He touched base on something extremely important for us, especially here in New England. About 55% of the New England population has no college degree. And the racial ethnic divide in education attainment in the working age population, 25 and plus, is also striking. For instance, the numbers you see in front of you, only 34.4% of the African Americans and 23.2% of Hispanics, they have a college degree. We, of course, know that an educated population is key to support the economy, and we are, of course, missing a lot here because of this gap in education attainment. The second area of opportunity is to look on those students who are graduating from high school but are not going to college. And again, we see this huge racial ethnic divide in the data. So in total, about 1/3 of the high school graduates, they don't go to college. This is the most recent data that I have coming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's 2019 data. Again, 1/3 of our high school grads do not go to college or finish college. That accounts for almost 1 million students. For those who have a business-oriented view, that's 1 million clients that we're losing. And if you look for, again, the racial gap, about half of that is made of Hispanic and African Americans that are left behind by the end of the process. So if the country could close the racial ethnic divide in terms of access to higher education, we could actually bring about 200,000 college students to higher education every year. That's half of the decline that we have seen going from 3.9 million students to 3.4 million students. So a huge opportunity here on these two fronts. So to sum this first pointing up, reaching out those, as Paul said, without a college degree among the adult population, and helping to get those high school grads who are left behind. There are very large, I would say, significant enrollment opportunities for the New England colleges and universities. And on top of that, they would certainly help the economy if you can bring that population, give them the skills that they need. Of course, this is not to say that we don't face other long-term issues, and not to say that a declining population is not a problem. But again, as an economist, we usually go with, on one hand, something happens, but then on the other hand, something else happens. And I'm going to put that into what I call a pessimistic view here, one that does have some empirical evidence showing that there is a relationship between population growth and economic growth. So the larger the population, the higher is the odds that we are going to have an Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, and that will, foster intellectual exchange and promote innovation, then growth. And also, as we lose a young population, we lose the boldness that come with those people. So this is, again, pessimistic in the sense that, yes, if you're losing population, we're going to face that and the economy will pay the price. But there is another view that we can think of, and I call that the optimistic, or we call also the opportunistic view. So these headwinds and predictions that we are talking about can be overcome as long as we switch the model where we are only thinking about the quantity of labor that we have on the market, or the number of students that's coming from a particular segment of the educational system. And we start looking on how we improve the quality of our labor. And this goes back to what Paul was describing a moment ago. And on top of these demographic changes, what some will call the fourth industrial revolution, it is destroying many old jobs. And that's going to keep happening. It's the creative destruction process. But at the same time, it's going to create many more jobs and new jobs. And that's going to change the demand for the type of skills from this workforce. So the retraining challenge for companies and also for higher ed institutions will be immense. And that's the point, again, that we create huge opportunities for training, retraining, upskilling of this workforce. And we are seeing that happen in front of our eyes right now, like micro certifications. They are, I think, a gold mine for institutional higher education, and also a very cheap option for corporations to quickly get the workforce retrained to take on the challenges that we are facing. So just to close my remarks, I want to talk a little bit about the pandemic. Also to build on what Paul was describing, I think we face major changes in behavior, both consumer behavior, also structural changes, and it is actually accelerating the changes in the skills or the skill set that we need from workers. I have some data from EMZ. This is actually a collection of millions of job postings across the country. This is 2020 data compared to the average between 2016 and 2019. And what we see is, again, the acceleration or the change in the demand for some very common skills that are important, or what's called the hard skills or more specialized skills. Communication, leadership, problem solving, innovation are all skills or capabilities that we have seen this huge increase because of, or during this time that we went through the pandemic. And then as we look for these hard skills, computer-related skills, I think they became the most relevant skills for all of us to perform our jobs. Everyone who is doing some interaction with other people, they have to know how to use Zoom today or some other tool. So that change is important. It's changing the skill set needed. So also the format and the delivery of education is changing also in front of our eyes. First, we know that moving forward, the pedagogy and the structure of higher education, also for the workplace, it will be a mix of 2019 and 2020. And that, again, that changed the skill set that we need. The second piece on that is non-degree and skills-based education is gaining a lot of traction. When we hear, for instance, Elon Musk going on the record saying that the degrees are not important anymore, but skills matter, it does resonate with people. So that means that higher ed must adapt and respond pretty quickly to those trends. Otherwise, again, we really have a very hard time moving forward. So to conclude and sum up my key points here is, I strongly believe that corporations, they may well benefit by looking for partnerships with colleges and universities to help their workforce to get the skill set needed to keep them innovative and to keep them competitive. On the other hand, the institution of higher ed, they must embrace and leverage these partnerships and rethink curriculum and program structure that we offer. For instance, we have to find ways to reconnect with our alums. Lifelong learning, it's no longer a buzzword, but rather something extremely important to help our grads to perhaps transfer some of the credits into a new degree or certification to allow them to move into a new career path. So I think my concluding message is of optimism. The higher education sector may face these headwinds, these demographic headwinds, as long as we can innovate from within. So we have to rethink how we are organized and how we deliver education. We have to become nimbler, and we also have to align what we do to what markets and our society and economy are looking for. Those are my key remarks. With that, I'm going to hand it to my colleague, Dr. Duncan Harris, to take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Eddie, for that. Interestingly, I was in on a panel last night with a charter school principal from Pittsburgh, and the forum was really looking at the impact of COVID on urban communities and really focusing in on K-16. So I wanted to thank Paul for his comments and what's going on in K-12. And I think that we need to make sure that this isn't a bifurcated conversation, and that we pull in our partners. I was glad to see the registrants for today. And the number of them that came from K-12 that are here also. Let me warn you, I've been in presentations where the introduction was 5 minutes. So I'll try to make sure that I behave and stick to the 10 minutes that we've been allotted for this afternoon. And I shared the individuals that were attending today. I'm glad to see some of the individuals where there are schools where I was a member of your NEASC or NECHI team, and some of the colleagues that I've worked with over the last 25 years. My experiences has been in the realm of community colleges, and while I'll focus on that, I also work very closely in Hartford. We have a Hartford consortium for higher education, and so we've had these conversations about the demographic and graduate declines. And I've had those conversations with folks in the consortium, Trinity and the University of Hartford, Goodwin, Hartford Seminary, Manchester, and other schools in that. And so while I'll start and I'll focus in certainly on community colleges and Capital in particular, I'll frame it around the impact in general on the state. And so, I had 3 questions that I was tasked with responding to, and, I reviewed the key findings from the report in terms of slight growth for the first 5 years, followed by decline. The second being a shift to a much more diverse graduating classes, which I'll focus my comments on. Strong graduation trends forecasted to bolster projected increase with an unknown impact of COVID. And then the fourth one from the national and general findings, but focused in on private schools, which Connecticut certainly has a number of those. However, the numbers attending the community colleges, it's a small N in that case. And based on the makeup of my institution, I was particularly interested in some of the findings around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Capital is one of the most diverse community colleges in New England. And so when we look at the New England numbers, Sheridan mentioned, we see the changes, and that Connecticut in some of the areas, starting with white students, has certainly a larger increase than New England in general. And so we're looking and anticipating a 37% decline over that period. Black students, and as Sheridan alluded to earlier, while New England is increasing, the number of Black students in Connecticut decreasing over that same period. So that was something that was very concerning to me. Capital, as we'll see in a second, is actually 36% Black students. Hispanic, similar to other states within New England, Connecticut is prepared for, will experience an increase in that area. Capital is also a Hispanic serving institution. We just received a grant, so we're really aware of that increase and are deploying strategies to improve outcomes for our Hispanic students. Connecticut, like Massachusetts, certainly is not proud of our achievement gap, and certainly one of the largest in the nation. And so certainly we need to make sure that we're mindful in addressing and cutting into that gap that impacts disproportionately our minoritized students. Asian Pacific Islander, a smaller increase than the rest of New England. Of particular concern, and while I recognize, and as Sheridan mentioned, that the N, or the starting number, is somewhat small, but the decline in Alaska Native and American Indian students over this period of time. So, for a 79% decline is extremely concerning, something that we need to be mindful of and deploy strategies to ensure that, be aware of that impact. And then the last thing, 2 or more races. And when we look at that number of, my nieces and nephew identifies 2 or more races, but my nephew, I would suggest, experiences systemic racism and some of the impacts in a similar fashion to me as a Black male. And so while that number is increasing, I'm not exactly sure, or I would suggest that population is experiencing some of the equity issues experienced by other groups. And so while we pull those numbers out, not exactly sure, that we need to be mindful of the lived experiences of students that are identifying as 2 or more races, or how they identify themselves. And so next slide. And so the first question I was asked to respond to: how will a high school graduate decline impact your institution sector in this state. And so once again, Capital Community College, our fall count, we were actually down 14% in the fall, largely due to COVID. Community colleges nationwide experienced a decline. We're somewhat optimistic that what occurred in 07, 08, and as kind of that post-COVID has the potential to be the place where individuals come to secure employment and things like that, that there might be an optimistic enrollment projection for us. And I think that, once again, the data suggests that the next 5 years, that there might be some relief. But once again, one of the most diverse community colleges in New England, 36% Black, 29% Hispanic, 23% Caucasian, 5% Asian, and 7 other. We are 80% of our students are part-time, right? And so what's reflected in that is with an average age of 28. And so once again, as we talk about high school graduates, and this ties to what Eddie was mentioning, we look at our bread and butter is the adult learner. And so we're while a significant percentage of our students are of traditional age, the majority of them certainly are adults. 71% female and 29% male. And so, once again, and as we talk about what we're planning to do and kind of the strategies, a lot of it does focus in on the adult learner. Our sector, the Connecticut Community Colleges, we're in the midst of a consolidation. And so, that is in part informed by, economic constraints. There was a commitment made to not close any of the 12 community colleges. We have a mix of rural, urban, mid-sized, small, and large community colleges. And if you were to look at what's occurring in Danielson, were we to close a campus in one of our rural areas, that's one of the largest employers, and it is in many instances the only access to higher education in there. So there's a commitment made to change and deploy a different model rather than denying access in any of the towns and cities that make up our state. And so we're optimistic that a part of the decline and the economic impact of the decline will be addressed by having a different model for education with regard to our state universities and our community colleges. And then when you look at the state higher education system in general, we have some of Ivy and small Ivy institutions that are some of the most selective or highly competitive in the world. And so I think that with national, international draw, and that they'll continue to meet their enrollment goals. And so I'm not exactly sure that Yale or colleagues, at Trinity Wesleyan, that they're as concerned about some of the declining enrollment trends as other institutions. Our research one, I'd suggest in UConn, that while stores and where they're the mothership per se might not have, it's still highly selective, highly competitive, that some of the forecasted declines in graduates will not have as dramatic an impact, but their regional campuses, which have a similar profile for students as our state universities and even our community colleges, will certainly be impacted in a very different way than the large research one. We have a large number of our state system, so the 4 state universities have already begun to experience increased diversity of their student populations, and so that trend will certainly continue. But I think that they'll also face pretty significant competition. And I have another slide where I'll talk about a little bit about our free community college, which is impacting that. And then finally, our private colleges and universities, which are experiencing a heightened competition. There's many of you may have heard about a proposed merger between Goodwin University and the University of Bridgeport that's underway right now. And I'd imagine that there may be more of that as a result of the declining high school graduates. And then the other thing that we're experiencing and observing is regional competition within New England. and then the tri-state in terms of New York and New Jersey, as a matter of fact. On 95 North, I live outside of Hartford, and there'll be billboards for my institution or other community colleges, along with the University of New Hampshire and University of Maine. And so this idea of we're already experiencing, this increased competition for regional competition, which I'd imagine will be heightened over the next 16 years. And so next slide. The next item that we're asked, what plans are underway are you making now considering the future because of the decline and changing demography of the students? And so as I mentioned, I think front and center in my sector is the merger of the 12 community colleges into one institution. We see a similar, the Dallas Community College recently moved to one college, of course, Ivy Tech, there are others. And so this idea of cost reduction, so we're not as reliant on, enrollment as a driver of kind of the structure. And so, that hopefully will assist in buffering the anticipated decline. That while it addresses things from an economic perspective, it also allows us to do scale and enterprise. Right now, we've already moved to systems for IT, one instance of Banner. There are elements around HR and economies of scale that have been deployed in that model as well. And then lastly, improve student outcomes and flexibility. This idea that I can apply to the college and attend any of the campuses down the line. So that is one of the things that we're deploying, anticipating declining enrollment. So we're not as enrollment focused or dependent from a financial perspective. We're talking about equity mindedness and being mindful. And so, once again, with Connecticut and the achievement gap that we have, and systemic things that are in place that cause our students to not be able to complete cognitively capable, but the non-cognitive factors impacting their ability to succeed. And so a lot of those things will roll and are equity informed. And at the heart of our merger right now is an equity, an opportunity to center on equity to address the achievement gap that has plagued our state. We're looking into strengthening of our transfer. We have a transfer articulation pathway program. And so once again, to keep the students that come into our community colleges, that they're completing at our state universities. And so, once again, which addresses some of the competition. And if you start here, you could finish your baccalaureate in the institution. So to see those students through from their associate's degree to their bachelor's degree. Like many states nationally, we're looking at free community colleges. We launched a program last year called PACT, which is a pledge to advance Connecticut. And so that is our free community college initiative. And once again, as you build a case for support, that it's a wise economic decision to start at a community college and then finish. I guess one of the individuals or student that I hold up all the time is a student that started with me at a community college, completed their business degree there. Then they transferred to complete their bachelor's in business, and then and completed at Dartmouth in this Tuck School of Business. But they, their cost of that led ultimately to that Tuck degree was a lot less. They talk about the foundation that they had and the quality of that first community college degree. And so I think that there's an economic case for support that we're beginning to build in a very different way for folks to start with us and in the community colleges. And so as we begin to compete, there's an economic argument that is a little different than it may have been 10 years ago. Eddie, I think, referred a lot to workforce and continuing education, innovation, and stackable credentials. I'll talk a little bit about a pilot that we're going to roll out at Capitol that speaks to that. And, our ability to stand up programs very quickly based on employer need and guaranteed jobs at the end of that is a very compelling argument to build that, for enrollment. cases and purposes. And then the last one I have on there is retention, retention, retention. I think that if I was giving this presentation 2 or 3 years ago, the idea of me suggesting that I needed to feed students or give them a micro grant to pay their rent would have been perceived as mission drift. And I think that fast forward to 2021, that as we talk about what it takes to for some of our most vulnerable students to complete school, that it's not mission drift, to be very aware of those non-cognitive things that are impeding students' ability to complete. And so, look at our community colleges in particular have really begun to look at mission. And I'd suggest that our mission in 2021 is certainly very different than the one in 1901 at Julia College, which focused on the first 2 years of liberal arts education preparation. And so there's this whole piece to the wraparound, I think, that Paul was talking about before, where that's essential, especially for students that have been impacted by equity gaps in their time prior to coming to our campuses. And then last slide, please. And so how will the decline in traditional high school graduates impact your enrollment strategies? And so this is the piece with innovation, or perhaps how we're shoring up enrollment. And once again, average age is 28, and so there needs to be an augmentation of the adult learner. Recruitment, we're doing this with partnerships with community-based organizations, the faith community. And I think COVID has really forced us in a positive way. We have an Achieving the Dream team on our campus. One of the things that I asked them to do now, while it's fresh, is to develop the list of things and strategies that have been developed during COVID that we're going to keep, and that are equity minded and equity focused. And so some of those are around access to childcare. We're looking at the times that we're offering our courses that are conducive to working adults. We're looking at the pace, of the classes, and do we really need to do 15-week classes? Do we need to have summers off? We're not, there's no need to farm during the summers anymore. How are we using the summers in terms of students getting to a degree or a credential? Increasing dual enrollment rate. So we have very robust college career pathways, which is our tech prep program. However, when you look at the yield rate, it's not where we would like it to be. And there's certainly an opportunity to scaffold those programs in a very different way in terms of the partnerships, and to increase that yield. And so do those students at Prince Tech, which is my local technical high school, do they feel like they're also capital students, in 10th, 11th and 12th grades while they're taking those classes? And so, by design, how are we really scaffolding, those dual enrollment programs, so that it's very clear that after June of your senior year, that you'll continue at Capital and complete a credential that's been mapped in a guided pathway format. Improved consumer education. I mentioned that before, as it relates to like Eddie. I was an economics major, and the utility and that this idea that we're suggesting that the wise economic decision in 2021 is to pursue either a short-term credential or associate's degree as a part of your calculus. And it doesn't necessarily, and I'm not sure that the model is like me when I was going away to college, and I got in the back of the station wagon and my parents dropped me off at a dorm for 4 years. So I'm not exactly sure that's the new model or the expectation for these Gen Zs. And that's one of the things that I was mentioning. My son, who's 15, I have some pretty sound plans for him where he's going to go, but as I see him and the things that he's doing online and how he makes meaning out of information, I'm not exactly sure that the Gen Z ideology mirrors my Gen X. And so, as we market to them, there's a number of them that want to get a credential degree or something like that, and to work right away, or be very entrepreneurial the world is a lot smaller for them than it was for me in terms of the internet and how they communicate with others. And so I think that there's a piece to marketing to that Gen Z group, which might be the short-term badges, credentials, et cetera. And one of the things that we're looking into that we haven't really done, like I said, I've been in community colleges for 25 years now, but as we talk about the summer and that being an on-ramp, but to really market to high school students, you know, the completion of a non-credit badge or credential, you know, after you complete your high school degree, and that could either be an on-ramp into the world of work or an on-ramp into to your associate's degree. And so really how they're using the summer, this idea that you're able to gain valuable experience and a credential that allows you to work. A lot of these young folks want to work and have a job. And so we're really looking at these non-credit on-ramps in a very different way. And claiming that as I think, as a student is a student is a student, whether they're a credit student or a non-credit student. And getting them into an on-ramp into education. And so so that will be one of our strategies that we're deploying this summer. And I think next up we have, I think it's Carrie.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in really quickly and thank all of you who are sticking around. And as I said in the chat, we're going to be stopping at 10:30 with all of our amazing speakers. We were a bit ambitious with the hour and 15, but we hope you stick around. So Carrie, back to you.
Great, thank you, Sheridan. Thank you, Dr. Harris. That's a tough act to follow. Just being mindful of the time, I will just focus on the last two questions that Duncan had just spoke on behalf of his work in Connecticut. And I think it's safe to say that looking at the numbers only scratches the surface. We are still in the middle of a pandemic. We don't know what the lasting impact is going to be for these students. We can't underestimate the stress that it is causing these students and their families. We're also at a time where we are experiencing political and civil unrest in our country and a mental health crisis. So needless to say, the conversations in enrollment have become rather complex. We've been watching these declining demographics, but our conversations have certainly shifted with these issues that are now at the table. For UMass Lowell, access has always been at the forefront of our conversations when we're looking at recruitment and enrollment, and that will continue to be the case moving forward. In 2015, UMass Lowell was the first public institution in New England to adopt a test optional policy. And the reason that we did this is we viewed it as an opportunity for more access for students. So we know that the SAT and the ACT can be a good indicator for students determining their potential to be successful in a college setting. However, it is just one indicator of their potential. And we felt that one test shouldn't disqualify from a student from being able to pursue educational opportunities at UMass Lowell. So that was our reasoning for moving towards that. We still do have students who choose to submit their scores. And as all of you know on this call, many students can submit their score. They have a minimum amount of students, maximum amount of schools that they can send their scores to without having to pay. And after that, they have to pay to have their scores sent. And we realize for many students that this can present a financial hardship for them. So this year we moved to allowing students to self-report their test scores as part of their application. And if a student does choose to enroll at UMass Lowell, we will then request to have their official scores be sent to us. And this was a way of removing those financial barriers for the students. Virtual recruitment has been a big part of our strategy. We recognize that many students don't have the means to come visit our campus, but they have a desire to learn what we have to offer. So we recognize this, and we've offered virtual tours, virtual information sessions. The pandemic has forced us to accelerate our options in a virtual environment, and we are very in tune to making sure that these events are interesting and compelling and being mindful of the characteristics of this generation. We know that we have 8 seconds, and you heard me correctly, 8 seconds to capture their attention. And we've heard from students that if an event is longer than 45 minutes, we've lost them. So we're very mindful of that as we are planning these virtual events. Next slide, please. We have been really focusing on diversifying our recruitment strategy, knowing the declining demographics. I've been at UMass Lowell for 20 years, started when I was real young, and the conversations in our office have been us noticing colleges and universities from across the country who are now recruiting in New England that had never been recruiting in New England in the past. So that has really motivated us to look at increasing our recruitment footprint. So we have regional recruiters and international recruiters that we are now working with to help achieve that goal of increasing our recruitment footprint. We also have been trying to make inroads with private and independent schools and working with the school counselors in those schools, recognizing that historically students from private and independent schools were more inclined to go to private institutions. However, we're finding that more and more are at least open to considering a public institution. So we're very mindful of that. Transfer students make up over 50% of our population at UMass Lowell, and we need to continue to ensure that we have a seamless pathway for our transfer students, both students transferring from community colleges as well as four-year institutions. And we're really mindful of the importance of exploring new partnerships with community colleges as well as four-year institutions, perhaps looking at 4+1 programs for students. We also are very mindful of the importance of increasing our visibility nationwide and making sure that we're using different avenues to really tell the UMass Lowell story and what differentiates us and makes the UMass Lowell experience so special. It's been mentioned here before, the importance of really doing an assessment of our academic programs, our course offerings, and making sure that we're offering programs that address the ever-shifting market and making sure that our students have the skill set and the experience for the demands of the future workforce. It's really important to us. Programs and partnerships have always been an important part of our recruitment strategy. We've been working with our campus partners to increase the programming and events for Hispanic students, Latinx students, urban and first generation students, because as Sheridan shared with us, we know that those students will be more of the college going population in the coming years. So we want to make sure that we're prepared for that incoming student body and we have the resources to support those students. We've had great success with partnerships with national organizations. We're proud partners with the DC CAP program, the Coalition application, ABC, and we'll be looking to identify more organizations that we can partner with in the future. It's been mentioned here today, the importance of summer dual enrollment programs and expanding those opportunities for rising juniors and seniors, and that we view this as an opportunity to expose them to what UMass Lowell has to offer both in and outside of the classroom. So we'll begin to further develop those programs in the coming years. It's already been discussed today, the importance of diversifying our student body, and we've already begun conversations about efforts to recruit and retain adult learners, veterans, students who have started at UMass Lowell but have stopped out for whatever reason, and re-engaging those students, encouraging them to enroll at UMass Lowell. We have to really, it's to our advantage to consider the different modes of learning experiences for our students. So looking at hybrid learning, online learning. I think this pandemic has showed us that many students thrive in different learning models, and that we need to pursue these different learning experiences for students. I think it's safe to say that the incoming freshman class that we know today will look very different in the future, and we need to be open to exploring those opportunities for students. Next slide. Thank you. And just quickly shifting to our enrollment strategies and, enrollment management, we're not just concerned with recruiting the class, but also retaining and graduating our students. When I think of our prospective students at UMass Lowell, we're very fortunate to have an all-in spirit, which was spearheaded by our chancellor a few years ago, and it was a call to action to the entire campus community to play a role in yielding the incoming class. And this spirit was well embraced by our university community, and we'll be relying on it more so in the coming years. And we're very grateful that our campus community recognizes that everyone plays a role. Before this pandemic, we began our discussions about broadening the scope of our yield events. Oftentimes we had our email campaigns, our big welcome day in the spring, and orientation programs, but we recognize the importance of a holistic approach to yielding this class and micro events, which include shadow days, master classes that students can attend. Student panels are very important. We also proposed to our community a few years ago, sending handwritten notes, congratulatory notes to our students. And I will admit, we were a little nervous to present this idea to our community, fearing that it would be perceived as corny. But I think I love when I receive a handwritten note in the mail these days rather than an email. So our students, our current students really embrace that, and they've been sending congratulatory emails to our students. So we really feel like the personal touch to students is really important during these times. We've engaged our alumni in these programs as well. We'll be looking to enhance our summer programs for admitted students. This is an opportunity for them to connect with the campus community prior to the start of the fall semester. So we're hoping this eases their transition and helps them to feel connected before they start their fall semester at UMass Lowell. And we really recognize the importance of leveraging financial aid and our merit-based scholarships for both freshman students as transfers. So that will certainly be a priority for us in the coming years. When I think of our current students, it is, yes, it's critical to attract new students, but it's even more critical to retain and graduate our students and stay true to our mission of the university. This pandemic, we made the shift to virtual advising, and we're hearing from students how much they appreciated this, how convenient it was for them. So in a post-pandemic world, we'll continue these virtual activities, as well as our virtual drop-in support at the beginning of each semester, where students can speak with representatives from financial aid, student billing, their advisors, admissions. We are very involved with re-enrollment campaigns, where we engage our entire university community to reach out to our current students who haven't yet registered for courses. And these campaigns are simple phone calls to students saying, we're just checking in on you. Are you planning on returning? If you're not registered for courses, how can we help you? And we're hearing from students that it meant so much to them that a staff member would take the time to pick up the phone to just check in on them. So the personal touch points are more important than ever before. We really need to be in tune with our students and what they want in their educational experience, and really be mindful of the comprehensive needs of the students, their academic support, financial health, and mental health. And just in conclusion, I would say it's knowing these declining demographics, it's really important that the entire campus community is aware of these demographics changes, is aware of the enrollment goals of the university, and that we're all in this together. We need to be strategic, willing to make bold moves, pilot new programs, but most importantly, we need to let this generation know that there's never been a time where that our society needs college educated individuals who are going to be transformative leaders and really prepared to adapt to an uncertain future. So I know that was kind of a whirlwind, but I'm just mindful of our time, and I'd like to turn it over to Lisa.
Thanks, Carrie. All right. If you could go back one slide. Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Elrich. I'm the Director of Admissions at the University of Maine at Farmington. So I thought it was important that you understand a little bit about who we are, and you can then see why we have a difficult job ahead of us. We are considered Maine's public liberal arts college. We're one of 7 in the UMaine, one of 7 campuses in the UMaine system. Typically a very traditional, residential campus, about 1,800 students total, including grad students, small classes, small faculty to student ratio. And we are actually the birthplace of public higher ed in the state of Maine. We are the oldest public college in Maine. So what is wrong with that model? If you look at the changing demographics, just about everything. Next slide, please. In Maine, we are, we're part of New England, but at times we feel very much like we're in a very isolated area, where we are, and where we are in New England is in the mountains region. So we're in the Western Maine mountains, beautiful lakes, mountains, heart of ski country. Our campus is located right in the downtown community, but it's a small community. Population of Farmington is less than 8,500. We're the county seat. The county is vast, it's 1,800 square miles, and it has less than 30,000 people. So very regional. And if we stay on this slide for just a minute, it's easy to look at the state and think, okay, but technically all of those New England states fit inside the state of Maine. So we have the second lowest population in New England, second only to Vermont. So less people, vast state. So our 7 campuses within the UMaine system are very spread out, and they focus. They were established as for a purpose to bring higher ed to those regions of the state. But so much is changing. The decline in high school graduates is changing. So we all need to change with that. Next slide, please. Now, most people think Maine, they think this. They think the beautiful Rocky Coast, they think lobster, they think lighthouses, and Maine is in fact a very beautiful place, and there is a lot of that, but the state is, we struggle. Not only are we have are we, as Sheridan said, we're one of the whitest states in the nation. We're also one of the oldest states in the nation, if not the oldest. We're looking at a decline in high school graduates of 11%. If you look at the average, 44% of the students in the state receive free or reduced lunch. And in some schools, it is as high as 75 to 80% within some school districts, certainly in some of the more rural areas. And that's significant. One thing that we did see on some of those slides before is the increased diversity in the state. Nearly 250% if you look at the numbers over the next few years. But that also means we need to be prepared to work with that diverse population and be able to address their needs as well. So, and then a really disturbing fact is only 31.8% of Mainers over 25 have a bachelor's degree. So we have a significant population in the state who college going is not, something sort of within their family, within their DNA. Their parents, it's not that they don't want them to go, but they don't want them to go. They're scared of change. They're scared their kids are going to change. They're scared of what that means. And up until, not that long ago, a student could graduate from high school, get a good paying job in their home community at, say, the paper mill, where dad and granddad had always worked. That's not the case anymore. So, the paper industry is declining. That's had a huge impact on our state, which has forced the logging industry to decline. Fishing industry has its own set of, difficulties and whatnot. So, we're battling a lot of different things at the same time. So, and every region of the state sort of has their own issues. The southern part of the state, where you see this beautiful lighthouse in Cape Elizabeth, Maine, that's where the majority of the population there, yes, they have, more significant group of folks have degrees, much higher incomes. Going to college is far more expected. You look at some of the other areas, even around here in our own community, that is not the case. So lots of things to look to. Next slide, please. So what do we need to do? We need to rethink and reimagine. We need to look at those, we have to find balance between our campuses and our regional missions and focus on opportunities to serve the needs of the larger, more diverse population. So what does that mean? Farmington, for instance, UMF does not have a nursing program. We are the only school in the UMaine system that does not have a nursing program. However, our region of the state has a huge gap in, skilled nursing, positions. We don't have enough. So we have just partnered with one of our sister institutions in the state to offer a nursing program. Students can live on our campus. We are going to have faculty that will be cross teaching courses. They'll do our gen ed. The nursing courses will be taught by our sister institution, the University of Maine at Augusta. Students can have that residential experience. They can be in this part of the state if that's where they want. And then we'll also be filling in their field experiences, their clinicals here in our own community at the local hospital. Another program that we just collaborated with one of our other sister institutions. We have an outstanding program in preparation for school health educators. Okay, we have another institution in the state UMaine system that has a preparation program for PE teachers. How many schools do you know that the PE and health folks aren't the same people? A lot. So we have worked together, collaboration. Students can go to the University of Maine Presque Isle campus and complete both certifications. Students can come here to Farmington and complete both certifications. So we're seeing more and more of that cross collaboration from within the UMaine system. So, that is extremely important as we each look at our own regions of the state, but also, focus on the greater mission in the state and the UMaine system campuses. Much like Duncan pointed out, these regional campuses, if you close one of those regional campuses, the easy solution is, oh, well, they're not making their class, they're in decline. We'll just close that regional campus. The impact that has on that small community is absolutely, it'll demoralize and just destroy parts of the state. So that is a critical piece, that Duncan pointed out that we're always trying to keep an eye on here in the state of Maine. So, lots of collaboration is happening within the UMaine system to help bring these things to fruition. And those are just a couple examples of things that we're doing. My other sister institutions are doing, some other things as well. Next slide, please. So plans moving forward. We've got to address adult learners. We have a lot of adult learners in the community. And, as a traditional residential campus, our schedule grid doesn't fit their needs. Our modality of teaching doesn't necessarily fit their needs. Well, guess what? COVID pushed us right into that virtual world now, didn't it? So, and that's the reality that our faculty are going to have to grapple with now, is that's not really going to ever go away completely. We're not going to pull the plug and suddenly move right back into complete face-to-face teaching. We've got to be able to, not hand feed, but we've got to be much more in tune with the needs of our students, what they need, who they are, and how it needs to get delivered, or we're never going to make it. So looking at degree completion programs, the University of Maine system has launched a new program to be able to work with adults who already have some credits, looking to come back to school, just not sure which direction to turn. There's a number of opportunities for them. So we have a program system-wide where, those adult learners or, those who have stopped out can work with counselors who can advise across each campus. So they'll be able to help move those folks into programs that are going to fit their needs. Looking at badges, looking at certificate programs, all of those things. And I agree, some of the things that Duncan said remind me so much of the students in this, just in this community. They're not sure that college is worth it. That's a national problem many of us have anyway. We've got to address that. They're worried about the money. Now you add COVID on top of that. And, we have students here. I know one of our students who worked in our office, his parents lost their home. So they moved in with him in his college apartment. He was working on campus, going to school full time, and had another job outside of campus at the grocery store to try to take care of his parents while he was 20 years old. So we have to look at those situations and look to be able to respond to their needs. So Enhanced aspirations, looking at more early college access programs, but what are those early college access programs? Not just taking a class that they get college credit for. Like I think Duncan was the one that pointed to it too, was they need to know who that class is through. Let's make that connection and not just let it be passive. We've got to be, if we've got them and they're enrolled in one of our classes, even if it's taught in an early college program and they're not on our campus, let's get them to our campus. Let's get them to our campus. Let's have them work directly here on campus, even if it's a couple times a semester, so that they recognize the benefit of, the campus that they're getting that course from and build that affiliation with them. And also working on those, continuing our mission of the liberal arts. We want to keep those soft skills going, but we also need to make sure we're working on getting them career ready. So, a lot of times those first gen parents, they want to know, okay, what is he going to do for a job with such and such a degree? We all know that the liberal arts degree can lead them to so many things, but, they want a direct path. If you're going to be an education major, you're going to be a teacher. You're going to be a nursing major, you're going to be a nurse. So sometimes we have to show them those career paths, and that's where alumni work comes in. Being able to show them, Dr. So-and-so started here, did X, was an EMT, and then did this and then did that. Even if they can't visualize it, from A to B, they can have little stop-offs in between, and that's fine. And we need to be able to show that, and that's good. Working with a lot of CBOs, working with agencies in the state and around New England is critical. And then a big piece is, if you're going to change the demographics of who you're working with, we've got to make sure that our campus structure supports the change in demographics. We've got to be able to have things in place so that adult learners feel like they're part of the community, not just coming, doing their classwork or enrolled and then off they go. They've got to have structure here on campus that supports them, not just for where are they going to study, where are they going to park, but what are they going to be involved in? How are they going to engage and be part of the community? If we're going to have, an increase in diversity, one of the biggest questions I used to get when I'd visit schools in Connecticut was, does anybody look like me? If I was talking with a Black student. Well, I'm going to be real honest with you. Most people look like me. Okay, where am I going to get my hair done? Those are critical things, and you've got to have a list. You've got to be able to support them when those questions come up. And they don't want to have to drive back home to Portland, for instance, to be able to get their hair done. And then again, working closely with our partners across the state to bring about change. Right now we have a program going. All 7 campuses are working together, also working with the Finance Authority of Maine to try to encourage these students that have stopped out, the students who have not applied to college through this pandemic, to consider that now is the best time for them to be getting themselves set up to go achieve something, whether it be community college, 4-year degree, certificate programs, because there are going to be jobs for them. We have jobs in the state of Maine that we can't fill because we need an educated workforce. So that is critical. Next slide, please. There's too much at stake for all of us to not succeed. So we've got to make the changes. 40% of Maine graduates do not pursue any form of higher education. If we can, we've got to show them that it's beneficial. We've got to show them that there are opportunities, and it isn't all about just sitting in class in boring thing. We've got to make it. We've got to make it enticing for them. We've got to look more at building, the hands-on pieces with the in-classroom learning. Those are the things that they need. The financial impact on the small communities especially is huge. I mean, the students here, the last study that was done brought in $2.7 million in revenue in the community alone, not to our campus, but to the community. If that went away, I shudder to think of what the town of Farmington and that community would be like. I am fortunate right now that we are in the middle of a strategic plan, developing a strategic plan. It's supposed to be finalized in March, so we're making some progress there. But the good thing about that is it has, not only has COVID been, it's forced us to change certain things, but the strategic plan is really helping get faculty to sort of understand and, grapple with what the reality is too. And that sometimes is the hard road to hoe, we'll be real honest, between, you know, our side of the street and sometimes their side of the street. There's a line, and we have to build that together. Change is hard, and change sometimes is slow, but we can't go too slow. We've got to change the things we can. You know, let's pick the low-hanging fruit and make those changes quickly once we know what, you know, exactly through the strategic plan, what that structure is going to be. And then we'll, you know, we're going to have a very tight timeline from the strategic plan on how to address those things. You know, colleges change lives. We all know that. You know, one of the accolades that I'm most proud of from the US News is we rank very high in social mobility. And that to me shows when your population is 50% plus first gen, you know, and or low income, if we rank high in social mobility, that's showing that yes, a college degree can make a difference. It can make the impact. So we can't lose sight of that. And another thing that I'm really encouraged about is, I'm sure a lot of you have heard, the Harold Alfond Foundation made a huge donation to the University of Maine system of $240 million. That's huge. Okay. Now it doesn't mean we're, you know, there certain things are earmarked for, you know, certain work, but 20 million of that is to go towards student success and retention. So all of us are going to be working together, you know, together and in our own regions to increase that. Our retention is very high here, but a lot, like Carrie said, we do a lot of things. We're small, so you know we try very hard to do a lot of personal touches, and really do a lot of caregiving for our students. Some don't need that, but some do, and some surprise us, the ones that need the extra hand. But we've tried to be able to be there for them. So that was very quick, but those are just sort of some of the same things that some of my colleagues have discussed, but we have some work ahead of us, that's for sure. But it's important work, and we can't give up the fight, for sure.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you. I just want to give a huge shout out and a huge thanks to all of our amazing presenters here today. And I want to apologize. We obviously ran quite significantly over time, but that's what happens, again, as I said, when you have such an interesting report with such widespread implications and also such fascinating speakers. So a huge thank you to all of you speakers, a huge thank you to all of you who stuck around. And just as an FYI, we will be sending this recorded webinar along with all of the slides around Monday or Tuesday next week. So with that, I will give you your Friday afternoon back. Have a wonderful weekend. And thanks so much for showing up.
Thanks, Sheridan.